And the video I am sharing with you today is in support of the oral language organizing idea of the new Alberta curriculum, specifically designed to support the grade 4 to 6 teachers. The goal of this video is to take a deeper dive into that organizing idea and share with teachers resources, activities, and ideas that may be helpful in the planning and the organizing of oral language in your classroom. This is not an egg carton. It's a rock collector. Maybe it's not a rock collector, but it's a paint organizer. Maybe it's not a paint organizer, but it's a keyboard. Here is an example of a simple activity that can be a conversational starter in your classroom. So I envision this activity with students from grade 4 to 6 sitting around in a circle on their chairs and the egg carton moving around the circle. And every time that egg carton gets to a student, there needs to be a share of ideas. So first student may say, this is not an egg carton. It is a group of mountains. The next person would say, this is not a group of mountains. It is a computer. So this egg carton moves round and around the circle as many times as you want it to, engaging students in conversation, in laughter, in sharing, in creative thought, in building ideas as a conversational start to an activity or a warm-up for the day. So what is oral language? So I love this definition shared to us by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education from Massachusetts. Oral language is often called the bedrock of reading and writing. So it's the foundational piece of how students speak and eventually learn to read and write. And so as teachers, I think we know when we get students to our classroom, those students that have been engaged in rich oral language and have had experiences at home are often those students that are better readers and writers. So oral language provides that opportunity for us to develop vocabulary and learn the syntax of our language. So those grammatical pieces that make sense when we're speaking. So if we look at the pillars of early literacy identified by the National Reading Panel in the early 2000s, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension were all of those effective reading instruction pieces that were identified as key learning opportunities for students in our classroom. So we would argue that that oral language piece is the bedrock of all this. So that foundational base that rides underneath all of these. And if we can have strong conversationalists in our classroom, students that have built a very large vocabulary and they're able to understand those grammatical pieces of how our language is put together, then they will do better in all of these pillars of early literacy. So in simplest forms, when we think of how babies acquire language, often they're listening. And once they start to hear all of those sounds of our language, they then start to speak them. Those sounds that they are now speaking become identified pieces of text when we engage them in books. And then finally, when students are able to write the words that they've been listening to, speaking, and reading, we know they understand it. So this is how simple it is. If we can develop that listening and speaking piece, then hopefully the reading and the writing that we're seeing of our students is going to be strong. So to be a good speaker, you first have to be a good listener. So I think one of the most powerful activities you can do as a teacher is have those conversations with your students and devise anchor charts of what makes up a good speaker in our classroom, what makes up a good listener. So can we brainstorm ideas of those skill sets that we want to see when somebody is speaking well, and then when somebody is listening well? And those anchor charts then become charts that are posted in our classrooms so that students have that accountability piece of what it means to be a good speaker and what it means to be a good listener. So how do you intentionally engage your students in oral language activities and conversation? How much time in your school day is spent where students are engaged in conversation? So they are working with each other, conversing with each other, developing vocabulary and syntax. And so in a world where we often see so many people in the face of a phone, an iPad, video games, or TV, where there's not a lot of oral conversation, can we devise intentional, specific times in our classroom where students will be engaged in that oral language piece? So the plan here is to imagine the possibilities of what oral language could look like and actually slot times in your Monday through Friday structure where students are in oral language conversation. And it doesn't always have to be an ELA. So this can be conversational time that's built into those subject content areas of math, science, social, music, wherever it may be. This specific example shows us that there's an intent to have 10 to 15 minutes of oral language time in my 90-minute literacy block. So what does that look like? If we take the organizing idea from K to 6 in the new curriculum, you're going to notice that that organizing idea from kindergarten through to grade 6 is the same. So it's the same one for grade 1 all the way through to grade 6, as well as kindergarten. So listening and speaking form the foundation for literacy development and improve communication, collaboration, and respectful mutual understanding. So if we look at that organizing idea and we see how the learning outcomes, which we have to report on, how they develop from kindergarten through grade 6, it looks like this. In kindergarten, those students need to be listening and speaking through a variety of literacy experiences. In grade 1, that listening and speaking comes through the sharing of stories and information. In grade 2, now we start to expect a little bit more of that effective communication. In grade 3, students are learning the skills, the processes, and the strategies in a variety of formal and informal interaction. In grade 4, they now need to connect and clarify those understandings. In grade 5, now we're communicating ideas and information. So there's lots of collaborative dialogue and problem solving and sharing and making decisions in speaking opportunities. And then finally in grade 6, we've reached that quality and efficacy of oral communication to oral language skills. So we're applying all of those elements, and there's a huge amount of public speaking in that grade 6 curriculum. So if we take the knowledge pieces, so the what that we have to do, plus the skills of how students are going to do that, we get to the understandings. So one learning outcome, which you have to assess students on in the oral language curriculum, and out of that is 5 understandings. So what we need to do and how we get there is through that learning outcome, and hopefully we get to the understandings when we do that. So if we dive into that curriculum a little bit deeper, we'll see that there is an organizing idea for each grade. There will be a guiding question, a learning outcome, and then we'll have those cusps. What is it that we need to know as teachers? How do we get students there through the skills and procedures? And hopefully then we will develop those 5 understandings for each grade level that are expected. So let's go in a little deeper to that curricular piece. And if you haven't spent a lot of time in your curriculum, you can go to this More Info button on the right-hand side here and actually go to the organizing idea piece. Let's go down to oral language. We'll start at grade 4. And we'll notice in our curriculum that organizing idea that we know is the same all the way through kindergarten to grade 6. What will be our guiding question will be laid out for every grade level. What is the outcome that we need to assess? And if you take a little deeper dive into this information button on the right-hand side, in your learning outcome, it will give you the resources, the competency progressions, the literacy progressions for that learning outcome. And that will be the same for every grade level. And so you can walk down to your cusps and you can see the what it is that students need to know and the skills and procedures of how you're going to get there and what students are going to have to do. Through that, you'll develop those 5 understandings that are laid out for every grade level. So I encourage you to get in and look at your curriculum. And we did that in a way that I think is a very successful way for you and your planning. So if you can dive into your curriculum a little bit deeper and go through each grade level, depending on what grade level you're at, and pick out the key words that jump out at you in that organizing idea for oral language. So go down to the knowledge pieces, get into the cusps, so the skills and the procedures and the understandings, and actually see at your grade level, what is it that students need to know when we talk oral language? This will be a very helpful piece in your planning. And when you do that, then you can devise the activities Monday through Friday that will be useful and actually target those skill sets that you want students doing at your grade level. So a few examples for you. What can it look like? Here is an excellent example of what can happen when we take students to an image. And if you go into this resource called Once Upon a Picture, and you dive into this example, you can actually go into a collection of images that will give you the image and then the conversational questions that could happen around the image that you choose. So the images are bright, beautiful, I think very detailed. The one I had chose was this one. And so I can envision this activity where students are sitting around again in small groups at their tables. And maybe you as the teacher are initiating conversation by throwing out these questions one at a time. So how did the shark get there? Give the students 30 seconds to have some conversations. Where did it come from? Again, give students time to converse. Was anyone in the house at the time? Were there any eyewitnesses? How did the residents on the street react? What happens to the shark in the end? That you can see as a huge conversational piece and students engaging in conversation. Another great link is this: Kids Think Wide. So again, very similar to Once Upon a Picture. The prompt is given to you, and then here are some discussion questions that you can now set students to. Have you ever experienced a special moment or made a fun memory on a rainy day? What are some sounds and smells that you associate with rainy days? Do you think rain can be beautiful? Why or why not? And so maybe students are having that persuasive conversation about why they feel rain can be beautiful or not. And what's nice about this site is if you go to the right-hand side where you see the star with the little stars, you can actually now add the animation. So now we see the rain actually dropping. So students can now be engaged in more conversation based on that animation. So what great ways for students to engage in conversation. Another way is to actually have students in partners. And this activity comes from Linda Mood Bell, and it's the visualizing, verbalizing activity, where one student is describing a picture using these gross structure words and fine structure words to create an image. The student that is listening is creating the visual in his or her mind by the descriptors that that other student is sharing. So I'd like to take you on this journey, and I am going to describe a picture. And I'm hopeful that after my description, you'll be able to visualize what it is I am seeing in front of me, but be very close in the image that I share. So right now in the forefront of my paper, right up front, I am visualizing a raccoon. And this raccoon has taken on the characteristics of a person. He is very fuzzy and furry. He's got very dark black around his eyes with some white fur eyebrows. He's relaxed and he's sitting on a blue metal bench in the middle of a park, but he's up front and center. So in the background, I am seeing very green, fluffy like trees. I see a lamppost that's black, and it's on that left-hand side of the trees behind the bench that this raccoon's sitting on. I hear people, and I see a walkway, and I actually see people behind the bench walking along the parkway. The raccoon is relaxed. He's got a backpacky sort of purse hanging over his right shoulder. He's reading a newspaper, and it makes me feel very calm. So it's a very relaxed day as this raccoon is sitting in the middle of this park reading his newspaper. So what have you visualized? Is it something like this? So you can again see how students could be engaged in a very thoughtful and intentful activity around conversation, around language, and around grammatical structure. So those are three very simple but fun, engaging activities that could be very, I want to say insightful or helpful in a grade 4-6 classroom for sure, to engage students in conversation. So the rest of this video that you will have access to will highlight some more resources for you to go in and pick and choose activities that you think would be worthwhile for students to partake in that 10 to 15 minute, very explicit instruction around oral language. So included in the resources that you'll have access to, the Once Upon a Picture, the Kids Think Wide, and the Linda Mood Bell resource that I just shared will be links that you can go into and explore. The Linda Mood Bell resource link actually takes you to a space where you can grab some free resources. This Project Zero's Thinking Routine Toolbox is an amazing resource that you will have to spend some time in. But if you think of all the types of categories for thinking, each one of these colorful tabs takes you into a list of about 10 to 12 activities that you could do with your students based around conversation. You'll see in this one, Think, Pair, Share, which many of us do, will be an activity that would be resourced here. If you go into the actual link, it will tell you what the activity is and actually give you the lesson plan of how you would attempt this activity. So there will be numerous activities in this resource, each one going to a whole bunch of different links. So if you're looking at introducing and exploring ideas, maybe you want to go on a See, Think, Wonder. Okay, maybe you want to go on a chalk talk. Actually, this is a great activity where students are moving around at tables and they are looking at something, viewing something, they're taking sticky notes, they're making their thoughts known by putting sticky notes on the actual image or the graph or the thing that you're wanting some conversation around. And students move and they take turns. So, every few minutes, students will rotate to another table. They'll have conversations about the sticky notes that are on that image or that idea, and kids will be engaged in conversation. So this is a wonderful activity. So again, take some time to dive into this resource, which walks you through a number of thinking categories, each having their own list of lesson plans and activities you could be doing with your students. Also, in this highlighted resource, there will be a link to our ARPDC slide deck. So if you go on to this one, this will take you to our website, and there will be an oral language resource here, which will walk you through a video as well as provide different activities for you that you could also do with your kiddos. Would you rather slide deck? This was actually taken from a group of teachers in St. Paul, where our conversational starters are around would you rather. So throwing out a prompt for students to have conversation, whether they're in a small group or a larger group, you throw out this conversational starter and kids actually gain or are involved in some conversation. And you might even do this in groups of 2. On top of that, there is a conversational sentence starter. So now instead of a would you rather, you're actually throwing out, I awoke from my dream and. So again, do you see students in small groups where they're in partners? Are they in groups of 3 or 4? Or are you throwing it into a larger group of conversation? Totally up to you. And then finally, as part of the resource link you see on this slide, we've added the Walking Together First Nations, Métis, and Inuit Perspectives document, which is included in your curriculum piece. But because there is so much conversation around the oral language traditions, this will take you into a very detailed resource with videos and linkage to examples and activities that you could be doing with your students. On top of these resources that you'll have an opportunity to share, we've added also this slide deck of more oral language activities that have been compiled across the province. So this will be a slide deck of different activities that you could also be doing with your grade 4 to 6 teachers.